Kia ora and welcome to Writing in the Margins. Today's guest is Josie, someone I met at a creative writing class. I used to love her stories, and when I started this project, she was one of the first people that came to mind. Josie and I had a good chat about not making the time to write, writing intentionally, and filling our creative cups otherwise. This one is a very interesting chat, so I'm super excited to share it with you. Let's jump into it. Hello and welcome. Thank you for making the time to talk about making the time for writing.
My pleasure.
I don't want to steal the scene, so would you like to introduce yourself first?
Okay, thank you. I'm Josie Whips. I like to think that I write in my spare time. I wouldn't say that's a constant thing I do. It's a periodic thing I do, but I really enjoy it when I do. And I have these thoughts about doing a lot more of it in the future.
Yeah. Oh, I relate to this so much. Well, I guess we know each other because we did a short story workshop at Victoria
That's right.
University, right? I
Yeah.
think that's the first thing we did, but we also did a creative writing evening class after that. Am I correct? Yeah.
Yes, we
Yeah.
definitely did too. Yeah.
Yeah. And I remembered you when I started this project, you were one of the first people that came into my mind. Because I really enjoyed the stories. I remember some of them, and I always loved workshopping the stories because they were always so interesting. And yeah, so I thought I'd reach out to you to see how your writing was going because I think specifically when we did that creative writing class, that was all a bunch of busy people doing it for fun after work. Whereas the Victoria University course was more like, I feel like there was not a lot of people like us who only took one paper. I feel like most people did the whole thing. So it was a bit of a different environment, I guess. Um, but yeah, every time I take a creative writing class, like an evening class, I'm always curious to know what other people are up to as well in their like normal life. And I'm always also impressed to read the stories because most people have really like are really talented and they manage to write a short story a week in spite of having jobs and having lives. Um, yeah, but then we did have a chat in person before this chat, and you
Yeah.
mentioned that actually at this time in life you are specifically not like you intentionally are not writing. Is that correct? Um, so that's very interesting because this project is all about making the time for writing, but sometimes it's also about understanding if the time is right or not, which is a very interesting concept. Do you want to like chat about that a little bit?
Yes. I was really pleased when you reached out with your request to get together and talk about our writing practice and what it means to us, because it made me start to think a little bit more about why I made some of the choices I did.
Mm-hmm.
And it's definitely different journeys for different people. And as you say, with the course at Vic, there are a lot of people there who are doing it as part of their degree course, but that was a different reason than yourself, and very different reason for me. When I was reflecting on it, I actually started the writing. My marriage had come to an end. I'd moved away from home. Nothing hugely dramatic, but just time in my life to try something to do something different
Yeah.
on my own. Although my son has decided to come and live with me, adult son, but that's what they do. But he does his thing, I do my thing, so it's not a reason I can't write now. But
Yeah.
um, I I've been an accountant all my working life. And whilst that's not very creative, particularly when I was in the UK, I was always working in a creative environment with television production and book publishing as creative people around me, and I would bring all the bits together in a puzzle. It wasn't about maths because I don't do the maths, but it was about bringing together different puzzles and stories through the numbers.
Mm.
And I hadn't really thought about that till I was thinking, right, I got work, that's fine. And in New Zealand, it's working with public sector, and that is what it is. Not so many of the creative opportunities, but still the puzzles. But I thought I've now got time where children are grown up doing their own thing. They're in their early 20s. They don't need me. What do I do? I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to spend time with my husband anymore because we've gone our different paths, but still fine, but different paths.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what I would have been doing for 20 years or so while they were growing up.
Mm-hmm.
All the things were on hold. I've been working hard and looking after them, so no regret.
Yeah.
But it turned into a bit of an identity thing about what do I actually want to do. I
Mm.
always enjoyed writing, and I thought, I don't know if I'm any good. I
Yeah.
don't know what I'd write about.
Yeah.
I'd sit there with a blank piece of paper. The first course I went on was to give it some structure.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the short story formats and the creative writing where they give us some themes to write about. And then I could start playing with it without the pressure of having to come up with my own ideas necessarily, but it could just prompt some things to then
Yeah.
send me down that path. And that was really good fun. And I have to say, with the university course, that was me wanting to know if I was any good. And because that had an entrance bar, you had to be of a certain standard to be accepted. I thought, okay, if I get accepted onto this, I know that I'm not fooling myself. I know I can do this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's too many exams in the past. I always wanted to pass one. So that was passing that. So
Yeah.
yeah. And that again was a format that I really enjoyed. Loved reading the stories that everybody put through. I still remember some of yours. There's some very spooky and interesting ones there
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. I ended up writing so many spooky things in that class, but without meaning to. They just they just happened. But
Yeah. Well, that's part of the fun of it because you don't know where it's going to take you.
yeah.
Um, but in recent times, and I think that's what I started to talk about when we had our chat before, I found that because of various sort of personal struggles with various things and just a stage of life, my writing was all, if I didn't have a theme, it was all going down the same path where I
Mhm.
was just reflecting on the same, oh, woe is me, I don't like this about my life. And I bored myself with it.
Yeah.
And because people talk about cathartic writing and there's a place for that. And I would take myself off to a cafe um, facing the water and just sit and write. And
Yeah.
that had its place. And that was great for a while when I needed it. But it
Hmm.
wasn't generating any content I then wanted to have a look at again and take further. It
Yeah.
was just a way of getting my emotions out there on the page, I suppose. But
Mm.
every time I read back on it, it was the same thing, regardless of any kind of different shape I was trying to give it. So I'm gesticulating a lot here,
No,
which, but
no, go for it.
it's
You're
a bit of a
speaking to an
roller
Italian,
coaster
so
for me. Yeah. um, when I was really interested in it, I start, oh yeah, I'm going to write all of this. But then when I went through that slump and started tailing off with the energy in the writing and tailing off with the insights, it was more just me working stuff out. And I
yeah.
thought, right, now I've reached the point where I'm on the up again, but I want to pause. I want to actually take that deliberate step back and think about what does writing mean for me now and going into the future.
Yeah.
Because I enjoy it so much. I do want a place for writing in my life. So I want to now start on that deliberate path again about um, creating my craft, working out what I want to write about, and just giving it a go and giving myself different themes. And in fact, I've started traveling a bit, and so now that's going to provide some of the material for writing. So I think I'm on the next stage of it because I'm
Yeah.
getting to the stage where I think about retiring and what I want to do. And I don't just want to sit and watch the telly in Coronation Street. I want to create things that
Yeah.
make me interested in life. And
Mm.
if writing's just for me and nobody ever publishes it, so be it. But
Yeah.
yeah, I just love the process.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've
Wow.
been talking.
No, no. That's a yeah. I loved how you talked about it. It's really interesting. I'm hearing lots of little different topics. The first that I'm gonna mention is the idea of identity. And
Mm.
um when you're asking yourself, like, what do I want to do now? Like, how much is that related to who do I want to be now? And how much being a writer is part of someone's identity. And what it means if being a writer becomes who you are, then what does it mean when you take a pause and when you don't write? Like, how does that affect, like how you perceive yourself? That makes
Yeah,
sense.
it does. And I was talking about this with a friend, a critical friend, in as much as they bounce ideas with me, and so it helps me to tease things out. And she was saying, "Do you say I'm a writer, or do you say I write?" And
Mm.
that's actually quite where I'm at the moment. That's quite a good distinction because I wouldn't feel genuine saying to people I'm a writer
Hmm.
or I will be a writer, and because they'll say, "Oh, what have you published?" And yes, I might self-publish, or I might, who knows, I might get picked up by somebody when I've got products that I want to share with people. But for me, that's not the measure of success for me right now.
Hmm.
And so if I say I write, that then allows me to have the identity of somebody who enjoys writing and does create works, word works, whatever we call those
Yeah.
things. But it doesn't necessarily have to be something that's measured by other people's standards of success.
Yeah.
And that's just around the semantics of the words, but that works for me.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think saying I'm a writer comes with so many side effects, and people have a very specific idea of what that means.
Yeah,
And for a very long time, that was also my idea of what being a writer meant. For a very long time, I thought you're a writer if you're published.
yeah, yeah,
No. And it definitely took me a while well, it's two things. It took me a while to be able to admit to other people that I'm a writer. And I think having a job that is writing definitely
yeah,
helped me. Um,
yes.
but one thing is saying it out loud, and one thing is admitting it to myself, because I always thought I was a writer, even when I was like in high school and I would write. So I would like, well, yeah, I write, so I'm a writer. But then
Mm.
but saying it out loud is a whole different thing. Yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
lot to do with success and failure when you start putting terms like that, and then it's in your own eyes, where do you see yourself? If your goal is to say, "I'm a writer if I get published," does that mean you've failed if you don't get published?
Yeah.
And I don't think that's particularly helpful to
It's
anybody in
really
their writing
not.
practice.
Yeah, it's really not. And I think it's like a self-imposed thing. It's like a label you stick on yourself.
Yeah,
Um I've had that a lot with, like, I've been vegan for a long time, and now I'm not anymore. And that was such a massive part of my identity. But then every time I would cheat, then it my own identity took a massive hit because it was like a failure to me. But that was
yeah,
like a self-imposed decision. No one had told me that I had to label myself like that. And being a writer is very similar, because
yeah.
for me at least, it's a massive part of who I think I am. And yeah, I'm definitely with you in the sense that I don't measure my success depending on how other people perceive success and what it means to be a writer. For me, I can not write for 2 months and I still consider myself a writer. Um, because I think writing is not an easy thing to do. You
It's
can
not.
practice, but there's definitely times in your life and seasons in your life where it's easier, and other times it's really hard. And it's okay to acknowledge that. And if you are not writing for a bit, it doesn't matter. To me, you're still a writer. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, very interesting.
Yes,
Um,
it's quite um, funny. In my work situation for the last 18 months, I've been doing a job that's still part of finance for a government department, but I do the writing for the finance functions and write the speeches for the CEOs and others to present the financials and tell the stories around that. And I think that I have found so satisfying because even though I'm not writing stories and writing my own content for myself at the moment, I have been able to find an outlet for it in terms of actually writing for work, which I hadn't even realised that I was actually any good at until I did it. And then they said, "Oh, we couldn't do that," but yeah, actually, and now
Yeah.
they made me redundant. That's a whole different matter. But I've got something else, so that's not a problem. But it's interesting about where I find the creative outlets,
Yeah.
and I think if I don't have that in a day-to-day base setting, I think I'd be more inclined to go back to it sooner in a personal setting. So it's that sort of balancing of the time and the internal sort of satisfaction.
What I was hearing you saying is that basically you're managing to use your writing for work still as as a way of telling someone else's story. Is that what you were saying?
Yes, and also as a way of, because I really enjoy words and different ways of expressing things, and even though I have to plain English a lot of things, I can do it in a way that still gives the energy to the speaker, and
Yeah,
that's one of the things I really enjoy doing, even though it's not
yeah.
me that's doing the speaking in that occasion, but I'm able to write the material, and I enjoy doing that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm always curious to chat to people who are writers, but also write for work, not just for themselves, because that's what I'm doing at the moment. And
Yeah.
that used to be a bit struggle for me to write for myself after writing all day for work as well, even though it's very different kind of writing and it's very different. It's two completely different audiences. Um, and my own writing at work is definitely not creative. It's very interesting to me that yeah, you managed to see the creativity in in your own work that like in your own 9 to 5, which is really fun, and it's like also a really good thing to like find a find a 9 to 5 that you like. It's always great.
Well, yeah, I was lucky enough to be able to create the program for it, so I thought I can do it
Mm.
the way I want to. But that's very unusual, and I don't think I'm changing jobs, and I don't think I'll have that anymore. So
Oh well,
I'll have to find some other outlet.
I'm sure. Yeah, in seasons in your life where you do write, um how do you make the time for it? How do you make it happen? How do you integrate it with your normal everyday life?
Well, one of the times when I was most prolific was when I had homework from a class
Oh yeah.
because um, deadlines are always a very useful motivator, and whether it's writing or anything else, I always find, and I've done this all my life, and I keep promising myself I'll change, but if I don't have a deadline, things just drift.
Hmm.
So, what I have started doing is set my own deadlines for when I want to have achieved a certain um, amount, whether it's if it's writing, to have at least mocked out some storylines or chapters, just have a target to aim for. I might ditch them next time I read through and do it differently, but it's finding that sort of slot where I think, right, Tuesday night, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write for an hour.
Yeah.
And it's easier to do that if that's what I'm planning to do with my life. And I know I've got no reason not to fit it in.
Yeah.
It's, I'm not always particularly good at it. And if somebody says, "Hey, come out for a beer," I'll change my plans. That's fine. And it's taken me quite a while not to feel bad about changing my plans as well. If
Yeah.
I Because I want to fit in exercise, I want to fit in music practice, I want to fit in all sorts of things, and there's too many things to fit them all in.
Hmm.
And then I have to remind myself, who am I doing this for? I'm doing it for me, so I can choose which ones work and
Yeah.
which ones, okay, I didn't get to it this time round, but next time I will. But still try and schedule them in. It's that
Yeah.
whole forgiving yourself thing that has been quite hard. But I've
Hmm.
also spent a lot of time sitting there not getting on with it as well. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, I feel like every time I chat to someone, often the same topics come up, and like compromising is one of them.
Yeah.
Just having too many things you want to do, and that's great. But also, it's we all have 24 hours in a day, and so what do you decide to do and when? And I think, yeah, going back to taking a break from writing, I think it makes sense when you want to prioritize something else, and that's totally fine because some people are just writers, some other people are writers,
Yeah.
but they're also just curious people who like to try and do many other things. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I've been thinking a lot about this because I definitely am one of those people with 2 million of hobbies. And yeah, for me, it's definitely a little bit about compromising and accepting that you don't have to write every day. You don't have to write every week. You don't have to write all the time. You can write sometimes and also do other things that might also be conducive to your writing in a way, because you can't just sit down and write all the time. You need to do
I
things
know.
to,
That's right. I think it makes you quite well-rounded if you do allow yourself to do those other things, or you're not feeling guilty because you've neglected something that you wanted to do for someone else. It's all part of just bringing yourself into it, I think.
yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think when I'm in a good space and I do create a writing routine and I make the time for it seriously, then
Yeah.
I've come into this habit of treating writing as a job. So if I decide that I'm going to write on a Tuesday night for 2 hours, that's what I'm going to do. And if someone calls me to do something else, I'm just not gonna say yes, because
That's very
it's
good.
it's like if someone calls me in the middle of the day and I'm at work, I can't
Mm.
leave because I'm at work. So I treat it in the same way, but only if I am in a good stage where I'm like writing, putting my head down and do it seriously. And it helps also if I have deadlines or if I have a project I'm working on. If I'm not sure what I'm doing, or if I'm doing it because it gives me joy, but I'm not, working on anything, then it's way easier. And it's also very okay to change the schedule and do something else. That's absolutely fine.
Yes,
Yeah.
because I do have that question for you on how do you decide what writing projects or why you yeah, how do you decide what you want to write?
That's a very good question. Hmm. This is gonna sound super philosophical, but
I
I
can
don't
cope with
really
that. I like
decide
that.
what I mean. It's more like ideas come to me, and then one of them will stick around, and I'll go with it. But
Yeah.
um, that's so woo.
Well, no, yeah, I've heard other writers say something similar where an idea kind of comes through and they just can't ignore it after a while. It's like
Yeah.
that whole muse idea, isn't it? That there's something that's prompting you to say this needs to be written or I need to
Yes.
explore
Uh,
this.
Absolutely. I think
Mm.
for creative writing, I do every time I read an interview with a writer and that just published a book, and they're like explaining how they had this story inside of them and it
Yeah.
just had to come out. It's very much like that. And I haven't had this on a I haven't created anything creative in that sense yet. Like not a massive book, but I've definitely had some short stories where I had like this character in my head
Hmm.
and they had to come out on a page. Like that is like this person came to me kind of thing, which is
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
strange to say, but in a way, it is what it is, exactly what it is. I do have I have self-published a book that's exactly that. It's
Mhm.
something that I wrote mostly for myself because it needed to come out. And yeah, and then I also do have a folder full of ideas that
Yeah.
are just sitting there. And I use that when I'm a bit stuck. So if I know I want to write, that's how I decide what to
Mhm.
write is I would go in there, have a rummage and be like, okay, this speaks to me today. I will expand on it. Doesn't have to be anything at the end, but it's like also a bit of writing practice, I think. And for this, I guess this project is a good example, to answer your question. I kind of saw a gap in the market. I was very curious to see how normal people like me make the time to write,
Mm,
because I read a lot of articles online about how to write 10 articles a day, um, written by someone whose job is to write 10 articles a
yeah,
day.
yeah.
Whereas I have my own job and a whole bunch of other things to do. And I could never see myself in anything I read online. But I know for a fact that there's a lot of people like me who are really talented writers and they produce amazing content. But they also have a 9 to 5 and a family and, a bunch of other things to do and they make it happen. And that's basically why I decided to work on this. And this is like not necessarily, it is a writing project, but it's a mix of medium, I guess. Just for fun and experimenting. Yeah. I don't know. That was a very long-winded answer, but
No, it's interesting because I often find myself that just thinking about people, busy people get lots done, and
yeah.
people will often say, "Oh, I've got no time for this, I've got no time for that," but and myself included, they waste time thinking about what they might be doing instead of just getting on with it, giving it a go, whether it's writing, whether it's going for a walk and thinking about, there's all sorts of different opportunities if we just allow ourselves to do something. And
Yes.
I regret the amount of time I've wasted not doing something, just thinking, oh, I ought to get on and do something. And I don't know what, go down some sort of rabbit hole on YouTube or whatever, and not it's fine if I'm doing that because I've decided, right, I've got half an hour to spend. I really want to relax. I'm just, oh, that looks interesting. I'll watch it. But if I'm just jumping from one thing to the next because I'm just too worried about getting on with whatever proper thing I ought to be doing, then
Yeah.
that takes you down into a sort of a worse space. So I think trying to avoid that will be the thing for me going forward. And I'm not writing at the moment, as I said, because when I was looking at it, I didn't like my writing. I didn't like the voice I was hearing. Um, what and it's different with creative writing if you're trying to create different kind of voices at the time. But do you find that you can write in different voices? I don't necessarily mean the speech now, but the style or do you tend to
Mm,
always have the same kind of approach?
that's also a very good question. For some things I have to. So if I compare what I do at work to what I do outside of work, absolutely. I've been writing as a job in different situations, and I've also done social media slash marketing writing, which is a great example of having to write in a voice that's not yours. You
Yeah.
write in the voice of the
Excuse me.
business. And um it was an interesting exercise. I didn't find it super hard because once you get, like once you understand what the tone is, it's kind of always the same. So you
Yeah.
just forget that it's you writing and you just, you know, put on a different voice. For my own writing, I don't know. So when I write at the moment, I'm writing a lot of nonfiction, like essay style slash social journalism kind of thing. So I write on Medium a lot. And it's interesting because it's definitely not my favorite kind of tone. It's very straightforward, it's very simple. Um, but it's because I'm working on a project that requires that.
Mm.
So it's an interesting exercise for me. I'm also trying to just produce a whole bunch of content that's like very short and just it's at the moment, I don't want to say it's quantity over quality, but it's definitely like getting a lot of stuff out. Um, so I feel like it's a bit like every time I reread something I've written, I'm like, this is not your best work. As in, this is not as the best way you are able to write. Um, but it's for a very specific context, so that's fine. Um, as I'm talking, I'm realizing that the answer to your question is probably yes, I can write in different tones because obviously I am forcing myself to write a certain way for a certain channel. Uh,
Yeah.
but then I guess when it's more creative writing, I think you can always see that it's me writing,
Mm.
uh, especially since we've done that course at Vic. And as we were saying earlier, that I ended up writing like spooky things without meaning to. I think that was a really nice way for me to notice that I can go down a different genre or like, experiment with something that was very new to me. I've never really written like sci-fi-ish things. But that was fun. It was really fun to try. And
Yeah.
I think if you compared those stories to something that I've written previously, which is completely like more realism, more like, I don't know, even like memoir style things, I think you could probably tell it's me behind it. But um,
Mm.
but I also think they would sound, I mean, more, they're different genres, and I think I have tried to give a different voice to different types
Yeah.
of writing.
That's interesting because I know with your creative writing stories, I could always hear your humor and
Mm,
dark sense of humor basically coming
yeah.
through. I always knew when it was a Julia story.
Oh, thanks.
So I
But
think there is
that's a
a
good
style that
point.
can adapt to different topics, but that you
Yeah.
can still have that same sort of fairly distinctive approach. Or it's not that you'd use the same words, but just the way you view things.
Hmm.
You're looking at the world in your own way, and I think people bring their own perspective and observance into it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, but don't we all? As
Yeah.
like, because it's true. Like every time I've done a creative writing class, I could like I always had my favorite people, and I could always tell
Mm.
what the stories were. Like, yeah, I think, yeah, which is kind of nice. I think, like, I think I like to recognize, like, when I read different books from the same
I was
author.
going to say do that with choosing books to read as well. That's yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. I enjoy being able to tell who the author is. Um, I can't I couldn't tell like I couldn't tell you a particular name of an author right now, but I remember like reading a bunch of books by the same person and one of them is different. And when they're like they know what they're doing for a few years and then they're like, "Oh, let's try this new thing." And it's like
Yes,
uh,
I have had exactly that experience with an author that and I hadn't read a lot, but I'd heard all of the good things about them as well. And I'd read one or two pieces that I really liked, and then I read something newer, and I just did not like it at all. And I was disappointed in them, and that was bad.
Yep, no, I
And I
understand
had to
that.
remember that they're just trying a different form, and then maybe that it
I
works, maybe
wonder.
it doesn't. But it's personal, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I wonder if it's because, like, when you read books by an author, that's all you know of them. Like, that's how you form your idea of who they are. And
Mm.
then if they do something different, you're just like not expecting it, as if you knew them as a person.
Yeah, I think that's it because I think it's the same with music. Because if there's an artist whose music you've liked for over the years, and then they try and do something very different, you feel surprised and a little bit sort of. But I don't like that style. You kind of
Yeah.
don't want them to change. You want them to keep producing what you enjoy from them, and
Yeah.
that's a little bit um,
Um,
restrictive, maybe. But it's
yeah.
something to remember for our own writing, isn't it?
Yep.
Have a voice and style, but yeah, be
Mm.
not be scared to try something different.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so much
Yeah,
fun to try, and especially if you're like at those stages where you're just like when we did that creative writing class, for
yeah.
me it was very much a safe space where I could experiment. I didn't really, it's you're not judged at all, you're not marked, you're just like
No, it's just
the
giving
fun.
you ideas on things you might want to explore, and
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, it's been a really good conversation. I really enjoyed. Well, I really enjoyed that you're intentional about not making the time to write as well as making it. It's a new,
yeah. And I've definitely reached the point where that's come to an end now, and now I'm into the intentional part of route writing again. But
yeah,
yeah,
it's amazing. And look, when you get back to writing, if you need some accountability and deadlines, you can always tell me what you're up to and I can check in.
you're on.
I actually do that with friends, and it's such a good thing. I also work on deadlines very well, so it's a great way of just saying every Monday I want to read something, you know? It sounds like you still need that creativity though, hey. Like it might not be writing right now, but it sounds like you are filling that cup some other ways, even though it might not be writing. Am I correct?
Yes, tomorrow's stained glass making, just to try different things and just see what comes from it. But also, I play the piano and I've been learning guitar, so just trying to do some of it so it doesn't feel like a chore. I'm
Mm-hmm.
trying to get to see what feels like, and it's so far it's only writing that feels like it's relaxing. The rest of them still feel like a chore, and that's about carving out the time to do the justice. So I haven't quite got that bit nailed yet.
Amazing. I wonder if it's because your writing muscle is very well trained and it doesn't feel like it's an effort anymore. Whereas other things you might still be learning and you're still at that stage where it's like you really have to think about it rather than
Yeah, I think there's some of that, and there's
that.
no witnesses when you're writing unless you choose to show it to somebody.
That is also true. Very interesting. That's true. It's less pressure, I guess. Oh, thank you so much for your time again. It was so lovely to
My
talk to you.
pleasure. Well, thank you for asking me. All the best with this interesting project that you're working on. So good on you for doing it. And
Thank
yeah,
you. Well, have a lovely rest of your evening. And yeah, I will
and the
definitely
same to you, Jules.
speak soon.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.